Welcome this week to Practice What You Teach. I am so excited to have you on this week. Tell us about who you are and what you do.
Hello, everybody. I am Jessica Wright, and I am the owner of Right Choice Counseling. We are both telehealth, and we're going to be in person in a few months out of Vandalia, Illinois. And I'm licensed in Illinois and Washington currently. We are a growing group practice. And what I do is I love working with couples. I'm working on my Gottman certification. And I also work with EMDR with some trauma. And my specialty is helping helpers. We call it helping the superheroes, people, veterans, first responders, and people who are in the front line.
Yeah. So how did you get into doing like couples work? Like how did you find Gottman?
Yeah, so I always say Gottman kind of found me. I went to University of Washington and Washington State, and that is kind of his home area of where he has the Gottman Institute of University of Washington. And for me, I just always knew that he was basically had research on what makes and breaks couples. So the more in therapy that I found that couples wanted to fix their relationships, like on day one, for example, usually couples wait on average 6 years to get help. So they come in and they want me to fix it on day one. They're fighting in their communication. But Gottman teaches us the evidence based of how to slow the process down and really get to know the couple.
Yeah.
So in my opinion, he is best practice, especially working with first responders.
Yeah. Yeah. And so how did you find like what drew you to working with the first responders? Like it's a
Yeah.
new population. So how did you come to do that?
Yeah. Well, it's a funny question. Because there's a lot of layers, but I was always kind of the mediator growing up in my family of origin, kind of growing up. I got really good at staying calm in chaos, right? Which a lot of
Mhm.
us helpers, we kind of are that way naturally. But then also, my other job is I work in prison. So I've worked in prison about 5 years now, as well as worked in DCFS and a lot of like real high stress jobs.
Yeah.
So I realized, especially in my time in prison, most of the people, a lot of the people, especially the tough guys in prison, they don't want to go to counseling. There's a lot of fears of if they go to counseling, that'll make them get a divorce. Their wife will finally come out and say she doesn't want to be with them.
Mhm.
Um, they're going to lose their FOID card if they say they're struggling with depression, for example. There's a lot of fears of that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And so how do you find that like using your Gottman training, using and I know you also said you do EMDR, like
Mhm.
how do you feel like that kind of helps your work with those first responders?
Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of just kind of teaching people how to slow down and be mindful of what's kind of going on in their gut, in their bodies, their shoulders. Maybe they're super tense, right? Teach them how to be mindful physically what's going on before they even try to have tough conversations, like around parenting at 3 in the morning when they're exhausted, you know? So just some basic things that seem kind of simple, but like even teaching my couples how to say, how much do you have in your cup right now? Like, is this a good conversation to have right after a stressful day at work? And they
Mhm.
actually name it. Oh, I have 50% of my cup right now. Oh, I have 10%. Well, should we talk about a tough conversation right now? You know?
Sure. Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so much more like bringing much more intention into those conversations so that they can
Yeah.
happen in a purposeful way.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So, what is being a helper yourself? What is something that you are teaching the clients that you work with that like you use in your own life?
Yeah. So use the most in our life. Me and my husband use the stress reducing conversation. My husband, he's a first responder and veteran, and Gottman taught me a lot about how to have stress reducing conversations, which we'll link in the notes. But and I can kind of go through it with you guys and just kind of like a snippet of what helps us.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, and it seems kind of simple, but actually is something that doesn't happen for most couples, especially when you are constantly giving and you struggle with saying no. Maybe so. I asked my husband, if you're a superhero like Clark Kent, when did he take time for self care? Like when did he say, I'm gonna not save the world today, I'm gonna go get a massage or go for a hike? And he laughs. He's like, no, Superman doesn't do that. So that's what I'm working with in this job, right? So I have to create things that like use Gottman stuff or create my own stuff that makes sense. So,
Right.
so an easy one, the stress reducing conversation, is basically finding a place that you guys, when you have enough in your cup that you can handle tough conversations, or hearing someone else's, what stressed them out stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm super flooded, which Gottman says, if I'm over 100 beats per minute and my heart's like racing, am I going to say, hey, honey, how was your day? Are you stressed? Like that kind of stuff. So basically the stress reducing, it gives us some guidelines, of how to have a tough stress reducing conversation. The rules of stress reducing is it has to be a thing you do regularly. So we do it every Friday. We have a date night. We have the kids go to the families and we have this conversation. Could be on our drive. It doesn't have to be sitting in front of each other. Most
Mm-hmm.
men like to talk side by side. Women, we talk face to face. So it actually works really well to talk on a walk or while we're driving.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I like to use him as an example because he's kind of that typical, like the one who doesn't like counseling, and he's married to me. So it's kind of fun.
Uh-huh.
So basically on that conversation, there's some rules. So the rule is you can't side with the enemy. So if I say, oh, I'm really struggling with my coworker, he can't say, well, your coworker was right.
Mm. Okay.
Right? Because that's literally dismissing what they're saying. And that's what we call the failed bid.
Yeah.
So the number of positive bids of like, yeah, honey, that does suck. Or do you want me to go punch him or whatever? Like you always side with your spouse.
Yeah.
Is the piece that first responder who are very black and white. There's not a lot of messy middle. My friend Karen Gilmore says the messy middle, it's hard, So that is a big piece. If they can agree to not side with the enemy, then literally the easiest thing I say is, what is the most upset? Okay, so we start with saying, tell me about something that's been stressing you out outside of this relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And it's super simple, but it's hard because, so that's the hard part because people will start talking about their partner. Well, you're not cleaning up the dishes.
Yeah.
So it's not about that, because the point of this is we want them to connect and to hear
Right.
each other, right?
Right. So something outside of the relationship, something that's
Yeah.
going to be a little bit more
Mm-hmm.
neutral in the sense of the
Yeah.
relationship.
Yes. Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just say be cautious with family. If it's like a family member that's really going to be a triggering conversation, you might just talk about something at work, something basic. But sometimes when we've known each other so long, we stop asking those questions.
Mm-hmm.
We think we know them. We don't really want to know if they're annoyed by the whoever at their job.
Sure.
Or the neighbor down the street, whoever, right? So we literally, it's just a 2-page sheet that I have here of the stress reducing that we'll have on there. And it's from there. It's like, he would ask me, what's the most upsetting thing about Billy Joe Bob upsetting you at work? And then I answer and he goes, oh yeah. And it teaches him how to say, wow, that's really sad. Like to understand what's being said. Because a lot of times, my experience, like working with vets, they shut down. Like when it comes to emotions, they're just really, I call it emotionally constipated, but they just don't know what to do with that. Like my husband will just, and I'm like, babe, are you in there? And he's like, oh yeah, sorry. That must've been hard for you.
Yeah. Yeah. And so with these conversations, I know you said kind of, one of the rules is that, you always you're always siding with them, even if you really, really, really feel like the other person was right. Like in that moment, we're focusing on that validation piece, remembering that validation is not necessarily agreement.
Right.
What are are these conversations ones that kind of like, I know you said that they can happen in the car, they can happen on walks. Like, how long do these conversations happen? Because I could totally see them turning into hours long venting session, which sometimes feels good and sometimes can like be reinforcing of those emotions. And so what does that look like?
Right. For us, honestly, it's about 5 minutes. Maybe there's something really heated going on and then we'll kind of get more into it. But they recommend 20 to 30 minutes, like from the Gottman Institute. But real life, when you got little kids and your kind of life is chaos, like 5 minutes is sometimes all you get with your partner one-on-one.
Yeah.
Some couples do this conversation every day. For us, it can be hard. We'll try it, or I'll say, babe, you're trying to tell me what the answers are and what I should do. I just need you to hear me. And I'm like, I'm trying to do a stress reducing conversation. And he'll go, oh, okay. So he'll put that hat on. It helps him to know I'm just
Yeah.
venting. I'm not wanting you to solve it. That helps a lot too.
So it sounds like it works for you and your husband when you name like
Yeah.
that this is the kind of conversation that you're looking for. It helps him to know what you're needing from him and vice versa too. Because I know it can be so easy for us to like, it's hard to see the people we love suffering. And so when we see going through something, we want to help, we want to offer solutions, we want to like take away their suffering. And so it seems like this is a way to kind of like, okay, we just are going to sit with those feelings, but together.
Yeah. And it's okay to say, I'm really wanting to solve this for you because I'm uncomfortable that you are so upset. So I want to give you solutions. But the trick with this stress reducing, there's all these questions you have to ask. Like, what's the worst thing that could happen in this situation? If you go tell them this or whatever, like that you said you wanted to do, what's this like for you? Very open-ended. And at the end, what do you need? And then at that point, you can say, you can give suggestions. You can ask your partner, would you like feedback or suggestions from me? But the point is they have to consent to you giving your opinions or giving solutions. That's the shift.
Yeah. Right? Yeah. So I imagine that because this is something that you're trained in, I imagine like, you know, these questions, right? You know, the ones that you're supposed to ask and I imagine having these conversations with you, your husband has kind of learned these questions, but like, what did that look like in the early stages? Like when you guys would sit down and have these conversations, did you have them on like a note card or on your phone where you could be like, okay, first question, here it is. Second question. Like what did that look like for you guys to start that practice?
Well, I just would literally print this page when I was working on my just my Gottman training. We all learn this stuff, and the issue is our partners don't because they're not in the trainings, right? So why I love Gottman is they want us to have our partners trained. So after we get certified, we all go to the Gottman conference they have, and then our partners learn it too. So, but we just literally have this sheet. And he'll say, babe, I can't find my sheet. I don't know where it's at. I don't know how to ask. And I'll say, just don't give me advice. Just say, that's really sucks right now. And he's like, oh, okay. It's just a reminder because I give him grace because I know we're just different. Women, we're really good often at just hearing each other. Like when our friend calls, we let them cry, we let them vent. Whereas when men, like their job is to go hunt and gather deep down, like rooted, right? Like, so it's just not serving them to dive deep into emotions sometimes, like first responders, especially.
Sure.
You know?
Sure.
So it's just a shift.
Yeah. So it sounds like it would totally be okay and normal to have like the piece of paper in those conversations and to be able to kind of have that like as a reference point and have it not feel like unnatural to be like, oh, let me look to see what the questions are here.
That's exactly right.
Is this conversation, because I'm also thinking about how, you know, sometimes you do only have a few minutes. Sometimes you might have a little bit of a longer time. You may have mentioned this, but is this something that is kind of like a reciprocal conversation? Is there like, hey, you're going to go first. We're going to talk about your thing. And then I'm going to talk about a thing. Or is it kind of like, hey, today's conversation is focusing on you. Next time we'll talk about my thing.
Yeah, so it is completely reciprocal. So whoever wants to go first, right? And then maybe the person that has something more heated going on or upsetting or whatever. Sometimes there really isn't much going on.
Sure.
You know, but it's okay just to say, hey, what's been stressing you out lately? What's been upsetting you?
Yeah.
And we just take turns. Yeah.
Yeah. So it sounds like it's taking turns within that same conversation though, and not like taking turns and like, oh, next week it'll be my turn kind of thing.
Yes. Right.
Yeah. So I'm just kind of thinking about how like sometimes we can be in like feelings that are just really heated, like even if it is like something that's neutral to the relationship, even if it is something with work, right? Like, we're humans, we have emotional brains sometimes, and we can get in those feelings and like we can kind of like get stuck in them. I'm just kind of like wondering, like, what does it look like for you guys to use this? Like when you're having a conversation about something that is particularly heated, or there is a lot of like, oh my gosh, I just want to keep going. I want to keep talking.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what does it look like to still kind of like have this conversation, like in an intentional and like
Yeah.
purposeful way?
Yeah. Do you have any idea what the thing would be? Like, what would the topic be? Like something deep down, discipline, or like a,
I mean, yeah, it could be anything, right? I'm thinking like
yeah.
maybe there's like a major change happening with their job, right? And maybe they're thinking
Yeah.
like, oh man, do I want to stay in this job? Do I want to change
Yeah.
jobs? Or maybe there
Right.
was a conflict with a friend of
Yeah.
theirs, right? But just
Right.
something that like is like sitting really heavy on one partner and they're feeling just
Yeah.
a lot of that,
A
like
lot.
a lot of intense emotion in the moment. Like
Mm-hmm.
what what does it look like to kind of have these conversations in that way so that
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't just kind of turn into like
Right.
of like
All the things. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, a big piece is managing if you are flooded. So if I'm talking and I'm at my 100 beats per minute, I know that I'm in my amygdala, my 6-year-old brain, right? So I'm probably not going to communicate as effective.
yeah,
Um, for me, like sometimes couples will have gridlock issues, like so we call them just ongoing issues that we kind of get stuck in. Well, every couple has at least some typically, like so it could be discipline, it could be different topics. It could be quitting your job, like you said, or not. And so those pieces you have to kind of discern, is that the thing that I want to talk about? Because the intention of this is to really be understood, feel connected, feel that love, you know?
yeah,
So is it a topic that's so heavy? Is this the time? Or is
yeah,
there something else that's just stressing you out? Hey, I'm stressed about holiday plans right
yeah,
now, and like where our family, who's going to stay at which house and whatever.
yeah.
Um, for perpetual problems and like issues that are like big, like things that you guys spin your wheels on, there's other interventions for that, and which we can always help folks with that too. But those are ones that kind of deep dive into what the values are underneath
Gotcha.
the stressful thing. Like, I'm so
Yeah,
stressed if I should quit my job. It might be about my value of freedom, my value of independence. Like, there's could be whole other pieces,
gotcha.
you know?
Yeah,
So it can be tricky if you're doing it. This is something that you can do by yourself, but sometimes those deep dive things are better with a mediator, a counselor, someone who's trained in this work.
oh, totally, totally.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking about how you said like it's really kind of checking to see if you're flooded. And I'm curious, like, what does that mean? What does it mean to be flooded?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm just thinking as you're talking, I have my handy dandy heart math. Are you familiar with heart math?
Mm-mm.
And I'm not like making money by heart math. I just like it. So Gottman Institute promotes us using heart math for our couples. So like people doing in person, or you can do it while you're at home. You put your finger on here and you just clip it to your earlobe, and it will tell you if you're over 100 beats per minute. Or you can use an oximeter. I have one that when couples see me in person, they just pop it on their finger and it will tell. I always want couples to tell me what their resting heart rate is. So it's like 60 to 70 beats per minute ish. And then when certain things come up, certain topics that we think, oh, this thing again, this is the thing where we never can get through our discipline issues, right? You
Yeah,
literally watch their beats per minute go fly high to 100.
yeah,
So a lot of first responders who have like hypervigilance tend to have some PTSD. They get more like 70 to 80 like quickly, but they might not be at 100. But
yeah.
when they're at 80, they're frustrated. They're like shutting down. They're stonewalling. There's nothing left. They're name calling. So it tells me we need to stop and take a break.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you are, so like, let's say you are in the car and you guys are having these, stress reducing conversations, and maybe you don't necessarily have one of those like fancy machines in the car with you. Like, how is
Yeah.
a human, like, how do you know, like, oh, I can tell that I'm feeling, maybe I'm starting to
Mm,
get to that flooded point. Like,
yeah.
how might you recognize that just within yourself?
Yeah, I mean, like old school way is like do your actual heart rate, right? But that can be hard. It's like when I'm stressed, I'm probably not like I'm gonna check my heart rate. For me, it's just knowing how I look, how I feel when I'm getting triggered. For me, if
Yeah.
I am flooded, most of the time, women in general tend to criticize when we're overwhelmed, and so
Mhm.
criticism is labeled as you always and you never. You never take out the trash. You never listen to me. That is a sign that I'm flooded, right? And he'll get defensive naturally, which Gottman shows in all the research. So that's when we feel like someone's at the cave and they're attacking us. So then it's like, oh, I wouldn't do that. Like you can just feel like they're trying to push the person away from hurting them.
Yeah.
So that's a sign my husband is flooded when he's defensive. And typically I have to think back, was I being critical? And he'll say, oh, you always, or I always, or I never, huh? Because he knows what criticism is labeled as. We study couples, like I watch them in Love Labs and the couples I see, and I'm like, oh, there's some criticism there that made him defensive, right? It can be the opposite for genders, but typically that can be it's pretty similar.
Yeah. So it sounds like it's just like a recognition of your own self of like, what are maybe some of the changes in how I'm thinking or how I'm communicating, or I'm thinking like, even just kind of like, you know, do I start to like get like tense in certain spaces? But it seems like kind of learning a little bit about yourself helps you to know,
right?
Hey, even if I can't like measure my beats per minute, right?
Yes.
Like, what am I getting to that space where maybe this topic isn't one for this kind of conversation?
Right. And being able to take influence from your partner, because I'll say, hey, are you feeling flooded right now? And he'll go, no, I'm not. And then you can tell he's flooded. So especially with being married to a veteran, right? Love him, but like that can be a piece. He doesn't recognize when he's flooded. And I'll say, okay, well, and we have a safe word that literally means we're taking a break. And I'll say, let's take a break from this. So the rules are 20 minutes to an hour of a break. And you can't think about the thing for that long. You can't message them. You can't. And if you're in a car, it's harder. So we literally just turn the music on and don't talk about it.
Yeah.
Probably don't talk at all, to be honest. Just listen to music. It's okay. That stuff saves our relationships, you know?
Yeah, some cool down time. So if anybody wanted to learn more about Gottman, more about, you know, some of these like conversation strategies, like how do they do that? How do they find somebody?
Just type in Gottman, I believe it's GottmanInstitute.com, and then you can just type in therapist based on what state you're in and what you're wanting. I'm also on the Gottman Referral Network, but there's a lot of different providers on there based on what you're interested in.
Yeah.
And you can always reach out to me as well with www.rightchoicecounseling.com and just sign up for a consult. We can just kind of talk about what you're struggling with. And if I can't help you, I can help find someone who can.
Yeah. And I'll put your contact information, your website, and the link to this resource down in the video description so people can easily find everything that we've talked about today. So
very good.
Thank you so much for joining us. This was super interesting. And I can't wait to try this out and practice this.
Yay.
It seems like something that could be, you know, a quick, easy thing to implement, but also something that could be really beneficial.
Yes.
So thank you for sharing.
Yeah. Let me know how it goes.